So on January 27th, there's another twist. Dr. Fauci is contacted over email by this scientist named Christian Anderson.
Christian Anderson is a virologist based in California who sort of started out as this whistleblower that the virus seemed unusual and might have resulted from a lab accident.
Christian Anderson came to him with a 2015 paper by Zhang Shi, who works at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And Anderson says it looks like a how-to manual for creating SARS-CoV-2 in a lab.
This is the paper connected to a scientist at the Wuhan lab. And if we scroll down here, you can see in the funding section, they cite 13 grants. All of those grants are connected to the US and the NIH, National Institute of Health. And 9 of those grants were signed by Anthony Fauci and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. I mean, Redfield saw the same connections weeks prior, and now random scientists like Christian Anderson are finding more of these connections on the internet, and they're directly emailing Fauci about it. And they all agree this fur and cleavage site doesn't look natural.
On January 27th, when Christian Anderson emailed him about the fur and cleavage site, Fauci says, if this is correct, then you should probably contact the FBI, because this could be suspicious. It may be signs of engineering. It may even be related to biological weapons research.
I would love to ask him about this email because I don't think it makes that much sense. Why wouldn't he call the FBI? I mean, this is a guy who's been in government for 40 years, more. Why would he not call the FBI? And then on January 31st, there's this paper from a group of scientists in India, Pradhan et al. And it points out not just the fur and cleavage site, but there are other areas of this spike protein that don't look natural and could be from HIV.
Wow.
Which is totally fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is frightening.
In addition to the fur and cleavage site, these 3 inserts were suspiciously similar to spike protein of HIV.
At that point in time, Dr. Fauci began an email storm. He emailed other members of the United States government, as well as outside scientists, urgently asking their opinions about laboratory origin.
And a lot of these panicked emails seem to be written to Sir Jeremy Farrar. Farrar is an extremely powerful scientist from the UK, and they seem to be back-channeling about how to handle this story.
Fauci and Jeremy Farrar consulted on how to address the optics, inviting scientists to an emergency teleconference to be held the next day on a Saturday.
You can look at the emails, like not a single email is written to Bob Redfield that night about any of this.
I considered both Jeremy Farrar and Fauci scientific colleagues. We may not go out to dinner every night, but we were scientific colleagues, and I thought there was mutual respect.
Redfield was not part of this February 1st teleconference that took place. It is unthinkable when there's a potential viral pandemic that the director of the CDC would not be part of this initial conversation.
So this emergency teleconference happens right after on Saturday, February 1st. And they have invited Christian Anderson, who had emailed Fauci earlier with his concerns that this may be a lab leak.
Anderson looped in Robert Gary, a Tulane close colleague of Anderson, and Andrew Rambo at the University of Edinburgh, and Eddie Holmes at the University of Sydney, who has worked very closely with the China CDC.
So all these guys are on this Slack. They're saying stuff like the virus became loaded for human transmission, exactly what you would expect from lab engineering.
The call appears to have been a shouting match between Anderson and Holmes, who had these suspicions about unusual aspects of the genome, and the gain-of-function virologists who had spent years saying that their work could not ignite a pandemic. We also know through Slacks that were exchanged during the call that there was some sort of quote-unquote big ask. But we don't know what the big ask was.
We don't know what was discussed on this call. We only have these Slacks. But a big ask was made. And you look at these slacks, whatever these dudes were asked to do, Anderson thinks it's hard to pull off.
Farrar, Collins, and Fauci, altogether they oversee about $72 billion in funding every year. So if you're a scientist and perhaps one of these gentlemen ask you to write something, you have an enormous incentive to write something that they will like.
Anderson and Gary had a very large grant proposal for a center of research on emerging infectious diseases in West Africa. That grant proposal was on Fauci's desk. In a very real sense, Christian Anderson and Robert Gary had $8.9 million to comply.
On February 3rd, there's another teleconference with Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak. Both had received a lot of money from Fauci's agency, and Daszak had been out in the media promoting this and his nonprofit for years.
EcoHealth Alliance, what is it?
Well, we're a non-profit, a typical charity funded by federal government and other sources.
EcoHealth Alliance has an enormous budget from many different US agencies, NIH, Department of Defense.
He does a ton of work at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There were a lot of people in the scientific community who felt like Peter Daszak may have known more than he alluded to. I mean, I really wondered, did Anthony Fauci think that too?
The goal of this February 3rd meeting was to combat misinformation related to the origin of COVID-19. That was the stated goal. Immediately after this meeting, Pradhan et al., the first paper to publish the existence of the 3 inserts suspiciously similar to the spike protein of HIV, a paper that was published just 72 hours prior, was withdrawn under intense pressure.
Gone. Taken off the internet.
Wow.
After the teleconferences, while the virus was spreading around the world and beginning to kill a lot of people,
death toll from the coronavirus now topping 34,000.
All these scientists that had come together to speak with Fauci and Farrar and Collins, they write a bunch of papers that claim this couldn't have come from a lab and must have come from nature. So was that the big ask?
All the members of that teleconference published 33 articles.
There was a paper that stated that there was no evidence for laboratory engineering. There's a section called Figures and Data, and it's empty. There's no data and there are no figures.
Day after day, week after week, there was a different scientific paper.
It has the quality of a media campaign.
And then there's this one in The Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world.
The letter in Lancet's not even a scientific paper. I call it a wedding announcement. It's orchestrated by Jeremy Farrar. It's basically an article saying that anyone who thinks this virus came from a lab is a conspirator. And it's signed by over 20 very prominent scientists.
At the bottom of the letter, it says, "We declare no competing interest." But Peter Daszak is the guy who writes the letter, so I have no idea what the Lancet is thinking, but that is a competing interest.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.